This is the Stuff Dreams Are Made Of. I'm writer-collector Ryan Condal.
And I'm writer-collector Dave Mandel. And as always this season, we are brought to you by Heritage Auctions. Your first name, Heritage Auctions, in taking all your money. Heritage Auctions.
Actually,
you. Yeah.
Very cleverly, because no matter what you're interested in, they will take all of your money, because they kind of auction everything, and they figured out
wonderful.
Anything collectible.
They're building up toys now. That's their next big
Pokemon
thing.
cards,
Really,
Magic the Gathering. I saw a photo of you holding a $12 million baseball card.
Yeah, we should put that up. Exactly. Yeah, they let me touch that, which is hilarious.
So is that the best one in existence?
I believe that is the highest graded one ever. I believe is the best one. They sold one that was slightly less good, but that also sold for a huge amount of money. This is the best. Basically, they have reached this point, which is like, I guess if you can seal it in plastic and grade it, Heritage will auction it off. So I don't know what that means for the future of mankind, but I know it's not good for me, or maybe really good and not good for my heirs. I can't really tell.
I do have some deli meats that are on their way out. I was wondering,
time to seal them in plastic and get them graded
from the refrigerator of the co-creator of the sequel to Game of Thrones. I mean, it's got a good ring to it.
Mortadella. But no, it is just truly effing nuts. And I joked with him. I said, literally, with the Greg Jean auction coming up on the October 14th and 15th, I should know those dates. Like, they're going to have an auction literally like at the beginning of the year. That's just the auction for stuff people have to sell because they bid in the Greg Jean auction. So yeah,
I think Joe told us that when we were talking to him, and I thought we sort of laughed, but I don't think he was kidding. I think they're actually planning for this like wild onslaught. Yeah. Very cool. So, so we've been doing a bunch of these, Greg Jean themed episodes. There are more to come. We will certainly, I think we're going to do one closer to the auction where Dave and I kind of, after we, clear out the cobwebs and just
we open our brains and try and figure out what the hell to do, because
reeling disorientation from
my son asked me the other day, because he knew I had come back from Dallas, and he was like, so what did you like, or what are you thinking about bidding on? And I was just like, I have a list of 50 pieces, and it's just like that's just untenable.
You took a minute to remember his name.
Work.
And then
but I mean, literally, it just does not work. I mean, there's too many pieces. Like I can,
and I'm kind of doing this. Because we are who we are, I have a smaller list than you that I'm looking at. But even mine is as big as it has ever been for an auction, and I'm sort of like,
and it goes in every which direction. Like there's things that don't necessarily, things that fight each other, but things that aren't. I don't know. I don't have a great answer.
And I'm kind of trying to like look at it in order to see like how does it play into my hand, or does it play completely against me? Like, is the long shot up first, and then then I can get like whittle my way down to the more realistic thing, and then so I can go crazy and then see, and then I still have a safety, but back, but who knows how it's going to work. We will regale you with
continued.
This
yeah, to be continued as we perseverate.
But tonight we perseverate. We wanted to
prevaricate to ourselves about our perseverating.
Yeah, very good. And vacillate and oscillate, and so tonight we have a totally different topic. That's a good Stuff Dreams Are Made Of topic about a movie that we have talked about on this podcast. But this is more of our kind of this is a run-of-the-mill Stuff Dreams Are Made Of episode. Right. It's not about
what's new in props. Yeah, exactly.
This once-in-a-lifetime auction. So what's new in props, Dave?
It's funny. And we were just talking about Heritage, but I'm actually very quiet in props right now. Nothing particularly, fantastic. I will laugh. There's a guy that I know through Facebook, and he's a good guy. So this is not about him, the person. It's more just about the stuff he's finding. And he seems to have a line on, I guess, more of like, just recent TV productions. And so, he's sort of always asking me about, things like, Ashoka and Andor and whatnot. And I sort of have started to feel genuinely bad that I have to just go, no, I don't like, I mean, I didn't mind Andor, but it's just like, no, I'm not interested. I don't want anything from these shows. There's nothing enjoyable about these shows, which I don't know, just sort of makes me laugh. There's a big comic art auction coming up, which I think will have, it'll have, I believe, happened before this airs. Also at Heritage, and there is one of the Star Wars covers. There were originally, in the world of Star Wars, the original adaptation was 6 issues: Star Wars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then issue 7, which was at the time as a kid for me mind-blowing because it started all new original adventures. I'd never seen that before, so it was a Han and Chewie adventure. And actually, the cover to 7 is something I have been looking for all my life. The cover to Star Wars 7 is just one of my favorites because I can remember that moment of like, oh my God, it's still going. New. Like the movie ended, but here's a new Han and Chewie adventure, just kind of like what I was playing in my backyard. So that Star Wars 7 has always been a biggie for me.
This is pre-Empire, right? I mean, this is Empire.
Oh my God, this is right as, the summer the movie came out. Or I guess maybe 7 was the fall. But anyway, so there were 6 original issues, and then they split them together, and they also sort of, they put them into combos, and then they did these treasury size, which were the oversized Marvel versions. And so there was like one that had issues 1, 2, 3 in it, and then a second one that had 4, 5, 6 in it, and then a third one that I think had all 6 of them in one, sort of almost like a trade paperback, I believe. Maybe I'm getting that slightly wrong, but anyway, that's how, at least in my mind, it was. And so this is the cover to issue 5 is coming up for auction. And I have the covers to 1, 2, 3, 6, and the Treasury Edition 1. And so I very much would like to add 5 and 4, which has never been seen. I'd like to find as well one day. But 5 is coming up, and I'm sort of, as they say, battening down the hatches because I am prepared for it to be a horrific number, which of course only hurts me, because then of course what happens is if 4 is out there and someone wants to sell 4, of course then it's like it's the same price, complete, if not more. And somewhere out there is also the other Treasury covers, and I think those are sort of great, but different than the issues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But of course, it just, it's this thing, this modern, I guess this is a modern collecting thing that we can all sort of talk about. It's not about comic art. It's just like every time, whether you buy a Blade Runner piece or a Star Trek piece or whatever the movie is, when you quote unquote set a record price, you are changing the market, not just for everyone else, but also for yourself. When I buy whatever it is, pick any movie in the world, if I buy, again, whatever it is, if I buy an Indiana Jones piece, I'm not buying it hoping it's my last piece. I'm hoping there's, more to come. And yet whatever that new
because
price
we're sick
is,
people.
Yes, changes the market, unfortunately, for the future of all purchasing. So it becomes this sort of slightly self-defeating kind of
self-flagellating
yes, exactly. It's definitely something I'm unfortunately thinking about as I'm thinking about this Star Wars piece, but and again, a comic art piece, but I'm not sure it's going to stop me. It's just a matter of, it's more like, oh God,
might slow you down
a little bit.
So this would complete the set, but for 4 for you.
But for 4. So I would have 5 of the 4. Yes.
Okay.
And please, I am well aware.
5 of the 6.
5 of the 6. Hold your letters back. I realize if I don't win this one, I will survive. I will be okay. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's going to cause irreparable harm to my life and happiness. I just would like to have it, is the answer. So
that makes sense.
Those comics were big. So
so 4 has never been seen, but is it known to be out there?
No, it's, I guess when I truly say never been seen, to me it's not known to be out there. Like it wasn't even like, someone has it or it's buried in their collection. It's just not. Now, by the way, though, this is the kind of thing, hopefully, that maybe, again, this is the good news, bad news. Sometimes, the record-breaking price or the news item about, lunatic buys Star Wars 5 for, 2 pints of blood and $1 million,
and still doesn't have the complete collection. Yeah.
Right. Wait a second. I've got Star Wars 4 sitting in the bottom of my bird cage. So who knows where it is? The one thing I think I do know, at least I thought I knew, is that I do not believe George Lucas has it in his collection. Otherwise, it would have been in one of the comic art books that they published. He just has never had that stuff. He has certain things, but not.
I guess that kind of surprises me, given his. Yeah.
I think at the time, nowadays, well, I don't know about nowadays, but for a long time, in sort of the later field of George Lucas's life, if you drew a comic story for Star Wars, Lucasfilm or George had the right of first refusal on a piece of art. Like I'm not sure they could set the price. You had to set the price, but they had the right to buy it or not buy it. And then whatever you set the price for, I think you had to make sure then you sold that for that price. Meaning you couldn't say, for you, George, it's $10,000 and then turn around and sell for a nickel. But there was a system in place so that he could pick up anything and everything he wanted. And he bought a lot of Star Wars art, just not the early Marvel stuff.
He wasn't,
of course, he wasn't doing it then. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
good luck.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I will update the world. What's new in your prop world? Oh, go ahead.
I have one, but before we do, one more probing question, just because I'm always fascinated. How long has it been since you've acquired a cover from that run?
I was lucky enough to get 2 of them a couple of years ago. I want to say, I think it was pre-COVID, so we're talking about 3 or 4 years ago. Okay. And I will protect his anonymity, but it was from a Marvel artist, and I'll leave it at that. Just somebody who worked in Marvel back in the day, and was connected to the books, not somebody that just took it from the office. Yeah. So I was lucky enough to get them, and someone I was a big fan of as well. So that was cool. Very nice and fun. And I hesitate to ever say like, oh, I got to know him well, but I at least got to exchange some emails and whatnot. And that was always very nice. So it hasn't been that long per se, but again, it would be, it would just, like I said, it would be nice. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Any actual props to talk about here on a prop show?
I do, Dave. I have a big one today. You know about this already, but the audience doesn't. But I'm going to share it. I actually have it to show here. So if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're just listening, sorry, this is not going to be a very visual thing for you. But you can go and log on to YouTube and see it. But I won a big Star Wars prop this summer. I think my biggest that I have, and here it is. Ooh,
hold it back a little bit. Yeah, there
we go.
So tell people what you are holding.
So this is a stunt Han and Luke blaster.
Yeah, Han and or Luke. Yep.
From Empire Strikes Back, and it was a heritage buy this summer from the Azarian collection.
Azarian collection. It had been in a previous auction that he had acquired it in a couple of years ago, right?
Yes.
Is that my memory of it?
Yes, yeah. It went unsold. There was a whole story about it. But it's actually very cool because it originally was sold through, forgive me, because I can never keep Christie's and Sotheby's separate. It was sold by one of the fancy British auction houses back in the late 90s, in like 1998. And the story behind it was that there was a TV show here in Britain that all the Brits know called Jim Will Fix It. It has a very complicated background to it that has nothing to do with this piece, but you can
Jim Will Fix It. That's the name of it?
Jim Will Fix It with apostrophe LL.
Gotcha. Jim will.
And it was sort of like a Make-A-Wish kind of thing, but more for like just like disadvantaged kids versus, kids who were ill. And they would make things come true. And there was a kid who wanted to meet Luke Skywalker, and it was sort of between Star Wars and Empire, and it was actually in 1979, so Empire was filming, and they made this thing happen, and the kid made Mark Hamill. There's a YouTube video. We can actually post it on we'll put it on the show notes, and we'll link it through YouTube or our social media, whatever magic Bart can do, where you can actually see the episode of the British show, and the kid goes and meets Mark Hamill on set, and he has a picnic with him or whatever. But at the end of all of this, it's like an 8-minute segment in total. It's not terribly interesting, but it is cool because you're seeing sort of period Mark Hamill in the costume trying to kind of improv and
so
vamp
he's
with this
basically
kid.
Is he in the in sort of the Bespin tan
He's in the
kind of
he's in the Bespin outfit on Dagobah, because I guess it was the Dagobah set
okay.
that was going at the
That's
at the
a
time.
nice place for a picnic if I had to pick a spot for a picnic.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
And apparently at the end of all this, either Mark or the production gave this kid this blaster. And
does this happen on camera or no? It doesn't happen on camera.
Sadly not. Yeah. But that is the story in the consignment to Christie's
Gotcha.
in 1998, and it was $1998, so it sold for not a lot of money, of course, because it was a stunt blaster. There was a poor photo of it in the catalog, but it's amazing, and it survived all this time, and I think it changed hands once or twice more, and now it's come here. It has all that provenance behind it. And there's the historic Christie's listing is all available. So it's or Sotheby's, whichever. It's all in the sort of history behind this piece, which makes it very cool. It doesn't match, but it matches the style of these pieces that were used in Empire and Jedi, and there were only a couple of them made. There are 2 in private hands that we know of.
That to me, sorry, just to jump in for a second, and this was all stuff you and I had spoken about in the lead up to the auction. I was always somewhat worried of, like, quote unquote, how many were these? Did other characters use them? And, our old Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, what's our motto? Do your research. You were able to figure out pretty definitively that this was not something that, like, every guy on Hoth was carrying in the back of his snowsuit, because that was always my fear in the abstract. Again, without having done the research, that this was a, where there are 1,000 of these. Was this just a common gun? And the answer was no.
It was not. And they made a basically a half dozen of these things according to paperwork, and there are 3 or 4 of them in the archive. We know there are 2 in private hands. I was helped with this research by a Star Wars expert who also whispered in my ear like the devil, saying, "Come on, do it. You need to have it." Who actually convinced me that it was actually a really, really great piece, and it's actually in wonderful condition. The other one is also great, and it's just a little more beat up and a little bit, there's more paint missing and everything. And despite being a stunt,
but I will actually argue. I mean, again, this is prop philosophies. I want some usage on my stunts. Do you know what I mean? Like, I get scared if you show me a stunt and it's so perfect, I start to question. I mean, I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like there's such a thing as condition is too good, which obviously an issue we've seen with a lot of this, more recent. I'm not talking Star Wars for a second, but I am talking about quote unquote production made and all of that stuff, or things that might have been production made that are masquerading as stunts. I'm looking at you, Thor 2, but anyway.
And I think it has. I think it has the perfect amount. I mean, I think you can clearly tell it was used. There's clearly, this is a casting of that era, and it's great. And I've talked a long time on this show about holy grails. I know you hate the term. We both do. But I've always said, or long said, sort of hero solo blaster. This is not a hero, but I think it's as close as I will likely ever get to one, and I love it.
You've been pretty close to mine. You've been standing near it.
That's true.
You're doing physically close.
Well, you have the rule that I can only stand within, I think it's 3 meters, right? You put the measuring tape out.
Well, that's not my rule. The court ordered it that you're not allowed near it too close.
That's right.
That's a court order.
The
thing,
unwelcome touching of your solo blaster. But I mean, this was not something I was planning on.
You don't have a long Star Wars list, and this was on it. So I think that's,
And it was not something I was hunting. It just sort of appeared in front of my face one day and did not know it was coming, and just had, I only had a couple of weeks to sort of make effort and plan and research and whatever, but it came through. It was not cheap, but it could have been much worse given what it was. And I'm really thrilled to have it. And we didn't really talk about, that happened sort of in the off season, but the Azarian collection, and I don't know. I mean, obviously your piece was not cheap, as you said, but it could have been a lot worse. And I mean, this is all hindsight. It feels like that collection and that auction
got a teeny tiny bit lost and buried, sort of post Commissar, pre Gene. I feel like
it was, and in the sort of dog days of summer, and it was only kind of online for about 3 weeks, and sort of came and went. I think all to the advantage of the buyers. There was some really interesting stuff in the auction. It was an odd auction. It looked
to me like they didn't want to have it up while the Commissar stuff was still up. Yeah. So it kind of came up after the Commissar auction was over, which did some huge numbers, surprisingly huge numbers.
Some huge numbers. And then you had to get it finished before the Gene auction launched.
I guess,
so it was sort of like...
It seemed like a little bit of weird timing. And I did wonder, and again, I think maybe I've emailed with Azarian once, so I don't pretend to know him, but I did wonder in terms of his own timing, was he trying to get, sell his stuff? And again, this is speculation. This is not accusatory. I did wonder if he was trying to get in before the Gene auction, whether he was looking to buy stuff or obviously
absorbing all the dollars.
Yes, there are things that are similar or whatnot, but it did seem like the timing ended up not being the bestest. And so I don't think you got a bargain, but I also think you got a pretty fair price for certainly for a Star Wars prop. Jesus. So
I paid what he paid. Essentially, I paid what he paid 7 years ago to get it.
Right.
So he got his money back.
Which I'm guessing was disappointing for the seller.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. So I was happy. I was happy about that. And then you just sort of put it away, put it out of your mind, and move on, and let it appreciate in your display case. Or at least appreciate it in your display case. And there was also a beautiful Stormtrooper helmet in that auction, which did not sell, but I think we understand now that it has since moved.
Yes.
In a private treaty deal at
and
post-auction.
It was an aggressive price.
It was a big number.
It was an aggressive price for what it was, but it did sell after the fact, as well it should. Just again, not perhaps at the number that they were looking for. And again, I don't have any answers. I wonder if at a different time, in a different auction, if it not different auction place, but just simply different auction timing, if numbers could have been different for it. But
yes. So
interesting.
But anyway, I'm really pleased and thrilled, and it was a bit of a saga to get it here and everything. Tale for another day, but it's here. It's safe now, and it's with me, and I'm delighted by it.
Will you have a what's the word I'm looking for? Some kind of a display made for it?
Already have it.
Stand. It's already. You already have it made, or it's already.
Yep, I already have it. It's already sitting there. It's waiting to be put in its place on a little stand.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic. Bravo you. Well done. Well, our guest today has nothing to do with Star Wars.
I think he's seen it.
No. But he fills to me a very important spot in the collecting world. It's something you and I have dipped our toes a little bit into, and we are certainly fans of it, and we buy them. He's an author, but he has sort of made a name for himself. He's a filmmaker as well, but he's made a real name for himself, as far as I'm concerned, in the world of making of books, and he has sort of been slowly but surely filling in the gaps of a lot of, especially the wonderful genre movies that we collect on, that have never had books, that you really are still having to like search back and find old, Cinefantastique and Starlog articles. And so when these books kind of happen, it's pretty, I don't know. I love it. And I think it fills an important part of, my collecting, bookshelf. So, pretty wonderful. So I don't know. I'm excited. I'll simply say,
well, let's bring him on. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us. We've been talking about you on the other side of this, about the amazing book that you had a hand in, that I got teased a little bit with it, because it was supposed to come out, or at least it was announced for like a summer 22 release. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'll pick it up at Comic-Con when I see the Titan booth. And then suddenly the date moved and I had to wait a whole year. But nobody's ever done a proper, movie book, as you know, on this great movie. So we had to wait till the 41st anniversary to get it. So it was very exciting to find, because I'm such a fan of the film, as it might be clear from what's behind me. But I I actually went through the pains of tracking down all the old magazine articles that Paul Salmon had written back in the day, and like finding copies and getting scans of them, or trading, this digital scan for that one. So I think I have his kind of run of articles as he covered the film across, American Cinephotographer and Cinefantastique and all that. So a bunch of these stories I had heard, but I think you filled in the gaps, pretty well, and also just kind of collated it all into kind of one place with a bunch of new and interesting photos. So anybody that's a fan of the film should go out and certainly grab the book. But we're very excited to talk to you about it.
Is there a question, Ryan? Is there a question for him in that?
That's it. You can go.
Giant long opening statement.
You can go. No, I was very interested in like he
likes it too much, John. This is the problem. This is a man who just wants to it's going to be turned into like the Chris Farley show. Your book is so really, 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 really good.
Remember when you wrote that Conan book? That was awesome. I was just very curious as to how you got this job and how it came together. We were aware of your Harryhausen book. Thank you for sending me a copy. I'd actually not had that book. Dave did, but now he has another.
Yeah, I didn't realize I had it till it showed up, and I went, "Oh, I've got that." So, but thank you. I re-gifted in a good way. Yeah,
and the great book plates that we got. Thank you for that. But and in your documentary, so we do want to talk about that stuff. But I was just curious as to how the Conan thing came together.
Well, it's great to be on, guys. Thanks for having me. Well, it simply came through the Harryhausen book. So I did that first book it came out in 2019, so just before lockdown. And the publisher said that sold very well. Would you like to do another book? And I'm a filmmaker, mostly documentaries and so on. And although I've been writing professionally for many years, not in published form, except newspapers and a few magazine articles. And I said, okay, did you want another Harryhausen book? And they said, well, maybe something else. And I said, well, next year, 2020, is the 40th anniversary of Flash Gordon, the Mike Hodges film from 1980. And they said, oh, we've tried to get the rights for that. It's not possible. It's in 3 different places. I said, oh. I said, would you want a book on that? And they said, oh, yes, please. But they said it can't be done. So I went off and we got together Universal Pictures, Studio Canal, and Hearst, the publishing empire, to kind of get a yes on that. And that was really the momentum for that book. I wrote it, it came out, it did well. And it was released, I think, it would have been during lockdown. It sold quite well. So there was no signings or screenings to go with that book. Escape from New York followed, and then Doctor Who and the Daleks, and then Conan the Barbarian. All of them had these unique problems around rights issues.
With each one of these, though, is it always you pitching movies you love, obviously that have maybe anniversaries and whatnot, but you're generating, I want to do a book on Escape from New York, I want to do a book on Conan, and they're saying, that sounds great, that sounds great. Are they ever fighting you on any of this beyond it's hard, the rights are hard, it's hard to write a book, but like, are they going, really, Conan, or are they just like, sounds great? Like, what's the attitude?
Well, for Titan Books, they've just done a deal with Heroic Signatures, who own Conan and other sort of Conan properties. So that was kind of an easy pitch. I have a really long list of books I want to write, and either we can't get the rights released from certain studios because they won't issue rights for older pictures, and that's Warner Brothers, which is quite famously known. No, not throwing shade on the folks down there. They probably have maybe too much on their hands to be bothered with books on Clash of the Titans and others that are in their library. But some rights then are difficult to get hold if they're with the Walt Disney Company, because you need to buy many rights together in one. And then the publisher has to see if there's enough market, because the books are really expensive. These are big format coffee table art books. So it's a combination of what I want, what they want.
Is there one that you tried pitching that the rights were available where the publisher said, I don't think there's enough of a demand? Do you know what I mean? Like one where they kind of went, no.
This one here, Doctor Who and the Daleks, which is on my wall at the back. I think they felt that the film was a success in the UK and Europe, but not in the US. And when the book did come out then last year, it sold out in the UK on day one. So Amazon sold out of its entire supply on day one.
Wow.
So
but we still have 10 million copies sitting in the warehouse here in the US. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, they're just literally, they're not moving. I'm just saying, they're just not.
So it's a balance, isn't it, between what I want and what I think an audience would want. But a kind of an indicator is if somebody's doing a 4K release, and Studio Canal did a very expensive 4K release of that, So the one thing all of my books have in common is that they've had sort of expensive releases either coming down the tracks or around the same time.
Yeah, well, I'm curious what you might know about Conan, because there's been rumors for over a year, and there was rumors about the 40th being a thing, and I think the rights situation with DeLaurentis and Universal, and that's one of the things I did want to ask you about, because I have a feeling it's very kind of pretzel-y and complicated. Do you know, my sense was that one of the independents had gotten the rights to do the Conan 4K, like a Shout Factory or a Kino Lorber or one of those. Do you know anything? Can you wink? Can you blink at us that this is happening? And okay,
yeah, there is. I can't. For
those of you listening on the podcast, he just winked. Okay,
yeah. Winked. I'm involved in some of the extras, so I kind of pop up and chat.
Fantastic! Very cool.
An essay for something coming soon. So I'm not sure if I can say more than that, but
okay, great.
It's very exciting. It's
in the works for
both films.
You will to me as we stop recording, because I'm desperate for it and I do want to know.
Without you two yelling at me, because I feel like I know the movie really, 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 really well, and yet I know it's so much worse than either of you, sort of, which is a very funny thing. Like in a normal crowd of like nerdy people, I'm an expert until this podcast. Yeah, until this, but. Are there any like famous deleted scenes or sequences that like might be out there? Is there anything like we've been, I don't know, like secretly dying to see or anything like that?
No, there's a whole issue around trims. I mean, if you know much about neg cussing and how trims are stored, I had a big chat with the folks down at Columbia Pictures for Ray Harryhausen's films to try and pick up some trims, because in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, there was a suited actor playing Trog for certain scenes. They were all cuts completely. And so we have photos of that, but none of the neg trims. And the folks down at Columbia said that there were no trims saved sort of from the late 1970s onwards. So once you had your married print, that was it. And the same would have happened. Gotcha. Yeah, and the same for Dino. Now, I was in touch with Dino's family for Flash Gordon, and it's a terrible state of affairs because he went bankrupt in the mid-80s for the first time. It happened twice. Studio Canal owns most of his assets from that period, except June and except Conan. And very little has been kept in terms of trims. The original neg is available. I think it's an A and B neg, so it's alternative takes on each roll, so it's quite clean. But the likelihood of finding trims in neg form, highly unlikely. The sound trims will therefore not exist because they'll only be on MagTrack. But there might be a U-Matic somewhere. But the thing is, this film would not have had any U-Matic tapes. Possibly Basil Polidorius, the composer, may have had a U-Matic or two, but not of anything other than the locked print. So it's not like mid-80s when there was maybe VHSs and U-Matics kicking around of alternative cuts. And we saw that for Paramount's Planes, Trains and Automobiles, lots of extra footage on the 4K.
But that also was, their rough cut, on Planes, Trains was like, 3 hours long or something, really crazy like that. And it had a completely different ending and all those kinds of things. That's not the case with Conan. I mean, alternative takes are one thing, slightly longer versions of things obviously is always possible, but there's no like other heist that they cut out because the movie was too long. You know what I'm saying? There was nothing like that jumps out at you from the shooting or the script. Right?
That was actually one of the things that leapt out to me in the book that did surprise me as somebody that has spent way too much time reading about and knowing about this movie, was that, it's suggested, you can shed some light on it, John, is suggested in your text in the book that Milius didn't really cut the final film. I mean, that was Dino doing it. It was Milius sort of like a la TV, like a TV director. Milius sort of delivered his cut, his contract ended, and then see you later. And then that apparently was 3 hours long or close to it. I mean, according to the book. And then, you had this great, it was funny. Your Dino quotes were like ring true in my ears, because all the Dino quotes in the book, you can just hear him screaming, no, cut it out, and so I'm curious. I mean, I've never seen a longer version of a script. I mean, there's the famous, blueberries, we used to pick blueberries in the springtime, which I actually quite like. That's on the international cut, but that's that scene is out there. I haven't seen anything else that, read a script or anything that would indicate what Dave is looking for, like a whole missing set piece or anything like that. But what do you know, John?
There's kind of trims, and if you think about the opening attack in the village when Conan's parents are killed, there was animatronic heads of mum and dad where they kind of their eyes open and their mouths gape. Some babies were thrown and tossed around and destroyed as part of that brutal assault. Apparently, John Milius, according to Raffaella as well, had put in some stuff that they knew they wouldn't get past the censors, so they could kind of trade down from an X certificate to an NR17. So that was what John was thinking about, John Milius. Dino was thinking about getting the cut to the correct length that had been contractually agreed with Universal Pictures. So there was kind of tension there as well. But there are significant amount of scenes. There are photos. If I'd had a bigger book, which I always ask for a bigger book, and it's a big book, but I would have liked more pages, I do have additional photos of deleted scenes that I could have shown. But often they're trims in scenes. So there isn't vast set pieces that have been taken away. There's not like a Jabba's palace sequence that suddenly appeared somewhere at the end, or something with the king's daughter. But lots of,
there was the King Osric murder, right? But we've known about that,
and that footage is there. That's on the DVD as well.
So who does own the rights to Conan? Is this a Universal thing, or is it somebody else now?
So it's a bit like
the film.
With the films, then it's owned by Universal, although Disney, through their ownership of 20th Century Fox, have some liens on the on I think it's the European rights, because it's Universal Pictures, I think, for the US, and for Europe I think it's Fox, so we can see it here on Disney Plus. So I think the release that might be coming is going to be US only, so that's what I've heard.
Okay. Well, Dave, you'll be sending me a FedEx, an overnight FedEx, the minute it is released. I'm sending it to your house.
Absolutely.
It's funny. It's hilarious, the things that you can see on Disney Plus out here because of the weird rights things. And also FX and Hulu don't exist out here. So all of those things end up collected on Disney Plus, and like these violent Fox movies from back in the day. And you just open up your menu and it's like a bunch of Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, and then Predator.
I had the weirdest thing with Disney Plus, which I didn't realize until I was trying to find something. I was going back to watch this is at this point now a bit ago, but I was going to watch the Beatles documentary, the Peter Jackson, the Beatles documentary, and it just was gone. And so, of course, then I'm searching like the internet, like, where is it? And it's like, no, it's exclusively on Disney Plus, and it doesn't exist. And finally,
your age
I
rating
saw something. Yes, my age rating had I either reset or I'd never touched it or whatever, but I had no idea that there was an age rating, and I turned it off or set it properly that like I'm an adult, and then all of a sudden, all this other stuff showed up on Disney Plus, and it's just like, I don't know. Just let us know. Tell somebody.
I had the same thing happen. Yeah.
Tell someone. But anyway,
So who, John? Who did you have to go other than Titan? Who had to go be pitched for this book? Did it require Universal and Fox and Disney all saying yes?
No, the main IP rights holder here is Heroic Signatures. They used to be called Cabinet.
Okay.
And it's owned and run by Fred Manberg.
I know those guys. Fred Manberg, I know.
So it's really through them. But the age-old problem I have with all of these books is that there aren't really the assets out there, the photo assets. So I'm leaning on fans, on my own contacts, on Prop Store, who have been very helpful with this and my next book on the Wicker Man. So you want to give people new pictures, high quality images, and it's really surprising. The budget for Conan was very high, and yet the assets haven't been looked after by the studios. Same on Flash Gordon, same on Escape from New York. As the rights for Escape from New York rolled to Embassy, and then Embassy lost the right to market the film, and as they went under, as things roll on to different libraries, a lot of things are lost on the way. And so the original camera neg is what most people look for, but they're not really looking for associated assets. So 40 years later, I come along and we're doing a book. It's like, how are we going to fill it? How are we going to charge people that money if there's not enough of new images? we were lucky with Ron Cobb and so on.
Sure, yeah, and I did recognize some things in there from Prop Store. But so do these things not exist, or nobody knows where they are, or they're not accessible, or do you have a sense of where? I mean, there must have been photos still somewhere, or did those just get eaten up in some DeLaurentis bankruptcy proceeding?
Yes, effectively. So I was asking Martha, his wife, about the props that were used for Flash Gordon and for Dune as well, and for other films. And of course, they were all big storage units. And once the creditors came in, they took and sold what they wanted. Most things, paperwork, got just dumped and trashed. Contracts, letters, memos, photos. Dino was famous for not allowing too many behind-the-scenes images to be taken, and that would involve the camera people being seen with the actors. So there'd be publicity stills, of course, because the studios would have a requirement as part of their delivery. But seeing kind of John Milius having a coffee or a cigar with your stars wasn't the sort of photos Dino wanted to show. He wanted to protect people from seeing what was behind the curtain in terms of special effects and in terms of the mystique. So it's a shame that in a way, because those pictures are harder to find. On Star Wars, there's thousands of wonderful stills of Tony Daniels coming in and out of his C-3PO outfit, and half an R2-D2 eating an ice cream, whatever it might be. So it's a harder find for these books, and you start to realize why it's taken so long. But it wasn't because there wasn't fan interest like yourselves who want this book. It's because either the rights have been frozen in time or the assets aren't there. So it takes a fair bit of heavy lifting to bring it all together.
Yeah.
And how much were you able to do, for lack of a better word, quote unquote, new interviews? And who really, when you were sort of, I guess, whether it was making your list or kind of reaching out, like who were the gets for you, or who really helped you kind of bring this book together in terms of the interviews?
Well, I had Buzz Feichens and Raffaella DeLaurentis, who met on the picture. Buzz was great friends with John Milius, who's quite poorly at the moment, so we exchanged emails, so that was great. Raffaella wrote the introduction for the book, the foreword. They met on the picture. The two of them are married afterwards, which was fun. So we spoke at length. And of course, getting Arnold on board was tricky because he had his own book with Taschen, and he was doing stuff with Netflix. There was a kind of a contractual thing. Also, there was some other issues around the IP rights holder, but I eventually did get hold, although he couldn't be credited in the book. So I did get hold of Arnold in the end, and we did have an exchange, and he saw what I was writing, because there are some tricky moments in the book when there's some exchanges between John Milius and Dino DeLaurentis about the suitability of this Austrian. And of course, Dino doesn't call him an Austrian; he calls him something else. And so we want to be sure that the language that was being used in the book wasn't too detrimental, and everyone was kind of on board. And so that was great.
Hey, the Stuff Dreams Are Made Of podcast listeners. Heritage Auctions, our new sponsor, is putting out the Greg Jean catalog for $50. However, we've got a special offer just for you listeners. This catalog is so good. This is going to be essential reference for your bookshelf. It is so great that this catalog, which is normally $50, for you, at the link in our show information, there's a link there right now, you can get the catalog for $25, only for Stuff Dreams Are Made Of listeners. It is such a great catalog. I told them to print extra. I told them our listeners are going to buy this catalog. That's how good it is. And I guess I need to tell you that if they don't sell, I'm going to get stuck buying them all. So please click on the link and buy a catalog. $25, 50% off. Set Phaser for half off.
So you spoke with Buzz, and you spoke to Raffaella. It's funny because in my long quest for my swords, which I both of those over my head I found out in the wild, as they say. In my long quest for those, I spoke to both of those people at different points about a decade ago while I was on my quest, and emails were exchanged and things like that. I've told the story on a previous episode of the podcast, but there was also a bit of a LinkedIn stalking that went on, and so I can appreciate how hard they are to track down. But both lovely people, and sadly, Ron Cobb passed away a couple of years ago, so I'm sure you weren't able to speak to him. But was there anyone else involved in the production that that is still with us that you were able to find or speak to? I mean, Jody Sampson is gone too, sadly. So they're the sword maker. So I don't know who,
Yes, I know William Stout, or Bill Stout, as people refer to him. He's a great American artist. He was great friends with Ray Harryhausen, and some of his art for an unmade Ray Harryhausen Eighth Voyage of Sinbad appears in my Harryhausen The Lost Movies book. So, he was one of the first people I went to. I know Jim Danforth through the Harryhausen Foundation, who's a famous animator, worked on Clash of the Titans. He worked on the unmade Oliver Stone version, and his work has been seen here in my book for the first time. So his concept art and the size and scope of what that would have been was going to be quite impressive. So we pretty much got hold of all those people that we could that were still alive, and it was great. They had positive things to say too.
The sort of forgive me, the Oliver Stone version that sort of never was. Just obviously, people need to go out and get the book. But how would you? I don't know, give us a little more color if you could, because obviously he's a character, as they say, Oliver Stone. He had a vision, right? That's the best way of putting it.
He did, and it was quite ahead of its time. So if we think that the film we saw in 1982 from John Milius is an action adventure with little in the way of magic, mythology, and monsters, Oliver Stone's film was much more of a Lord of the Rings with magic, mythology, and monsters. So much more in keeping with Robert E. Howard's original text for Conan. The estimates that they created, the budget estimates, showed it would have cost 2 Superman the movies, which was vastly outrageously budgeted. And so, of course, it couldn't happen. And Stone found it very difficult to cut back on the excess. So the giant hordes of mutant armies that you would have had. There was a robot sequence. There was winged harpies. So it was very much sort of Ray Harryhausen meets Lord of the Rings. And for 70s technology, in terms of time and budgets, and in terms of enthusiasm from the studios, it was too hard to pitch because it was sword and sandal with fantasy. And it was something that there wasn't a nearby comparison to say, oh, it's a bit like Samson and Delilah, but with Ray Harryhausen creatures.
Right.
How could you get a fix on that? And of course, Oliver Stone was hot from winning the Oscar for Midnight Express. But they took this property, himself and Ed Pressman, to many different people, different studios. They spoke to Ridley Scott, hoping that he might take on the mantle as director. But it wasn't to be. But it was only when Dino came on and stripped it back and saw that there was some promise in it, but it needed to be done at a more realistic level. So if you look at the special effects in the film, like the snake, I think that works really well. The animatronic snake, which was full size. When you think it's well before Stan Winston, the shop they set up for this in Spain was set up for this picture. Whereas if you were doing this today, you'd go to established places that have many years of experience in doing hydraulics and so on. And of course, Stan Winston, if you could afford his shop, is where you'd go. At the time, it was pretty much on the hoof. And I think it works really well.
It does. Yeah, it still hangs together. Interestingly, for people who are into the subject of this podcast, that snake apparently went missing during or after production, and has never resurfaced. So very curious as to where that might be.
When I was watching the Arnold Netflix documentary, when he was at his house, wherever in the woods, I was very much looking like, is there a snake somewhere in the background? Yeah, does he have it? Because that would be my hope, is that he just took it home one day. But anyway, no, I didn't see a snake.
Most people don't keep most things from films. And in terms of Dino's work ethic, he always was looking to the next thing. He wasn't looking to keep memorabilia or anything that would remind him of the previous film. He'd had a bad experience working with an unknown actor on his previous big expensive film, Flash Gordon. And here he was entering another comic book superhero with another unknown person, and they had a clash when they first met. So he thought it was going to be Sam Jones all over again. So he didn't have the same sort of romantic view of his own films as perhaps we do now, looking back with the perspective of 40 years rose-tinted specs. But he was a pragmatist.
So going into Conan 1, he was not thinking about, well, there's all these books because obviously, nowadays, if Conan had never existed and nowadays they decided to make Conan, they would be thinking about at least the 3 movies they could make, if not, obviously, however many books there are. You know what I mean? I mean, he wasn't thinking.
I think he was,
series.
No, I think he was, because when Stone pitched it Stone and Ed Pressman pitched it to Dino, they said it could be a long-running franchise. They talked about James Bond and so on.
James Bond, sure.
And when John Milius took it on, he had a 3-picture vision, which would end with King Conan as the 3rd film. And we talk about that in the book, how the 3 films would have progressed. So on Flash Gordon, Dino tried to buy Pinewood Studios because the intention was to make 3 Flash Gordons back to back. That's why the sets were so large and elaborate and hard standing. So Dino was always looking to get the most out of an IP. And when they did do the 2nd Conan film, he was really invested in making sure they found a bigger audience. So he had his producer's hat on, thinking Conan the Destroyer would actually be the one that would kick off the series and make it more sort of family friendly.
Yeah. Yeah, not the right.
And Ryan, you've been working for the last 30 years on a Conan the Destroyer making of book. How is that going?
That's right. That's right. No,
it turns out there's no demand in America or the UK for that book, as it turns out.
No, I keep getting asked.
No one is interested.
The fans keep asking me for that book. When's that coming? And that's, look, to be fair to Ed Pressman and to Dino, their producer instincts were right. The landscape for fantasy films in 1982, Blade Runner, I think Tron, and a few other films that didn't do that well. By 1984, look at the output. You've got Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Ghostbusters, Star Trek 3.
Yep.
So I think their producer instincts, Never-Ending Story, their producer instincts were right. If you can bring it to a younger audience, the Indiana Jones audience, where, you know, it's still adults coming, but you can make it more available to younger people. And it's more of a Harryhausen adventure. You know, what Conan does in that 2nd film has nothing to do with the Robert E. Howard universe. But it feels more like Ray Harryhausen. I could have seen that taking off, not with the hardcore fans, but then it's not the hardcore fans Dino was aiming for. He'd got those in film 1. He wanted the Indiana Jones audience. So his instincts were right, but the film landed in, I think, a crowded marketplace in 84.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I've always said about the failure of Destroyer, you know, sort of, I think creatively and commercially, is that because the first film is so John Milius, it's really not Howard. It's John Milius's Genghis Khan movie. You know, it's like John Milius's Genghis Khan samurai film. It's so specific to him that trying to sequelize that movie without Milius, I think that's the thing where it fell apart, because he was the central DNA that just kind of glued all that stuff together and made it feel, I don't know, authentic instead of cynical. When the second movie feels very cynical, it just feels like it was okay, let's do Conan for the PG-13 audience.
That's true, it was. But I mean, you've got to remember what John did for Dino on Conan could have destroyed the relationship with Universal Pictures. They weren't expecting an X-rated film to be delivered, and that's what executives were looking at. I think it was Ned Tannen and Dino were at the screening of the final version, so they had a preview screening, and they were both there more or less agog, thinking, what have we done, and what's this picture? Raffaella loved it. Of course, John loved the final cut as well, John Milius. But Dino really didn't get the film and didn't feel that they'd made something that was worthy of the budget or that was worthy of franchising. So it's kind of clear to see where John Milius and Dino parted ways there. They were very similar people, great talents, but they were both alpha males. And it was really Raffaella DeLaurentis who kept them together. So she was the production glue that made things happen. And she gave John Milius really the freedom to make the picture he wanted, whilst keeping her father sort of happy with daily reports. It was lucky that Dino was working on so many pictures. Had he seen dailies or rushes more regularly, I think he would have been more involved. And you don't really want that. You know, he's a great man, but you don't want him that involved on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, and I'm very glad the film exists, because it really is a John Milius fever dream in all the best ways. You mentioned in the book there's quite a nice section on Renato Casaro and the work that he did for the film. Did you get to talk to him or the family? I
did, yes. Yeah, I know Renato reasonably well from my Flash Gordon book. So,
great,
you find that the Dino people, whether it's the people working in special effects like Barry Nolan, who I've spoken to many times, and also Renato, Dino tried to work with similar people. And had Dino had his way, I think it would have been Ennio Morricone doing the score, not Basil Palladorius, which is brilliant. It would have been brilliant to have had both. Well, if we think Ennio Morricone then went on to work on Red Sonja with the director of Conan the Destroyer, and one of the stars, or two of the stars, the star of Arnold and Sandro Bergman from Barbarian. So as that became the unofficial third Conan film, you get a sense of what Dino wanted, and he wanted Ennio Morricone.
Yeah, so. Fascinating. And Renato Cassara is the artist of the famous movie poster that you see right there, and I interacted a bit with him and the family now also 10 years ago when I was trying to track down the art, and I just sort of hit them up at the right time, right place. They had just finished the sort of world tour with it, but I didn't speak to him. I spoke to him through a family member that I guess answers the emails, but I was kind of talking to him. It was just being translated back and forth. So I did get a bunch of sort of interaction. Fascinating, and what a career the guy has had, and
really became the definitive action. I mean, I don't know what to call it. Action movie poster guy. I don't know.
Yeah, the muscle men of the muscle men of the 80s. That he was. It
was almost like they were in competition for him. Like if Schwarzenegger used him, then Stallone had to use him, and then it's like, well, no, I'll use him again. That kind of, which is kind of interesting.
He's a proper fine artist too. His works hang like in the museums of Europe and that aren't movie works. He was sort of doing work as an illustrator to make money, to make a living, but he's a proper fine artist.
His original pass on the picture had a severed head in Conan's right hand. So in the Conan picture behind you there is just a clenched fist. But originally, I think we have it in the book. We do have it in the book. Like you can see the clump of hair, and it's actually a severed head. And of course, Dino was like, well, we can't put that on subways. That's not allowed. So even the blade itself is bloody on the original pass, and you see the blade in the final version that you see behind you there is nice and clean, like he's cleaned it off. There's no blood on him.
Yeah, I guess he really was just, I mean, as you put it, just trying to make a different movie, or wanted a different movie on some level, Dino. I guess he got it with the second one. I don't know. I feel like there's that thing, this has so little to do with Conan, but it is that thing of like, you see with the Star Wars movies, which is like, obviously Star Wars movies, kids love them. But when they started trying to make movies for kids, it's a different thing as opposed to just making a movie that everybody likes. I don't know. It's a sort of a pointless debate, but
yes, agreed.
When you aim at children, I think you often ruin a movie for adults as opposed to when you just make something, I don't know,
appealing.
Everyone.
Yes,
exactly.
And that's I think that's the difference between the original Star Wars trilogy and sort of everything that came after it. Is that was just made, and it like there was a lot of adult stuff in there that kids had to kind of deal with and figure out and
or ignore, by the way, or ignore.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was just told that way, and kids found their way to it instead of being sort of made for them. That was just a good point.
But if Conan the Destroyer had been a big hit, say it had been the #1 film of the year in 1984, do you think you'd have had a different view of it? And it was the same picture, so you had found that massive.
I don't know. I mean, it's tough. I hated it. So I'm sorry and some of it is also, even at the time, like the casting and stuff, and not specifically Grace Jones or anything like that. It just, I don't know. It just seemed. I just remember just thinking like it's less. It just seems like not much of a movie. And again, I don't know what else was there on it. It just, I don't know. To me, it's nothing. I don't know. It doesn't hold up much. I don't know. But
it's got some great lighting.
How it did or didn't do. Yeah.
Jack Cardiff done some great fantasy lighting on it. Another great score from Basil Polidorius. Some interesting stuff from Carlo Rambaldi.
Not questioning any of the pieces. I just, story-wise, it just never quite kicks into a gear. I don't know. It just, I sound like a terrible studio executive, but I just like the quote unquote the stakes of the mission I just never cared about. So you're just watching a movie unfold that you're not particularly interested in. I don't know, for me. Yeah.
Well, Krull opened the year before, didn't it, in 1983, and Krull was super expensive, but was super unsuccessful, but has found an audience now. I think people who liked Krull, like me, would have liked that.
Krull is sort of terrible too, but I guess I find it fun terrible. Again, these are one person's opinions, so I don't know. Yeah,
I wanted to do a book on Krull, and the publisher said no. So
that's a good example of a movie. The no. The funniest thing, by the way, this is apropos of nothing, but Ryan and I both grabbed our copies. Was it that night of San Diego? Was it the first night? Or yeah. On basically the preview night of San Diego, we went running over to the Titan booth and we bought a copy of your book and a crazy advanced copy of the making of Wrath of Khan that they also have, I guess, coming out later in the fall. And we grabbed them and we got the special pin and the special keychain and the special book, whatever. And then like two idiots walked around for like 5 more hours with the books, for me, the books like on my back. And by the end of the evening, just crippled from like walking around with these 2 hardcovers because we had to have them right at the beginning of the show to make sure neither of them sold out, whatever, and then just carried them all night until it just hurt. So
and then I did a bunch of traveling after that.
For your books.
I kept having to unpack and then repack those books as I made my way slowly back to London on multiple plane flights going to see family in the US. So the book's have been on quite an odyssey.
So you're like Conan. I know, like Conan in the opening scene when he's walking in a circle, carrying all that weight.
Yes, it was the wheel of pain. Only there was no wheel. We were just walking down the aisles with the pain of these heavy books. Which, but I will say this, which is, I don't know. You want a heavy book. You wait all these years for a Conan book to come out. Yeah. You want some heft, I mean, I certainly would have been, I think, angrier had it been a thin, pamphlet. So kudos on the heft, I guess. I understand you wanted them even heavier. Maybe it's good that they weren't heavier, but still, I applaud the heft. Yeah.
John, was there anyone that, I know that you did get to Arnold. Was there anyone that you tried to get to that is still living and with us that you couldn't reach or didn't, wasn't able to talk for whatever reason?
I think there was a couple of the more minor actors and a couple of the stunt players. I'd got hold of Max von Sydow shortly before he died for my Flash Gordon book, but I wasn't prescient enough to ask him about Conan, which
to ask him the Conan questions.
Which I regret now, but I only had him for a very small window. But with all these things, it's a case of what can somebody add that's of value, and for me, my big kind of search is around the effects people. So I want to find the people who built the snake, who failed with the original snake. On Flash Gordon, there was deleted scenes for spaceships, and much of the work was done with strings instead of motion controlled, even though they have 4 times the budget of Star Wars. Why was that? So those effects questions, I'm a kind of an effects nerd. So everything for me is kind of billows out from the special and visual effects, and of course the director and the writer. You try and get the actors when you can. Sometimes there's issues around agents, and sometimes not for this book, but for others. If people feel they haven't had their just desserts in terms of residuals, and that's across the board, not just performers, they'll feel kind of reluctant to talk to the new rights holder. So that's always a bit of a task to break down those barriers. I send them my other books and say, please speak to me, because this is an oral history. My work with the Harryhausen Foundation is as much a history of animation and protecting Ray's legacy as it is finding people's testimony. So often people will say the wrong thing, not be challenged for 50 years, like Christopher Lee on The Wicker Man. And you have to go back, find witnesses and try and straighten out the story. And not to accuse a great person of lying, but to get it right whilst those people are still with us. And that's been a real problem in some of these other making of books, where people have just accepted what they've been told, even if it's contradictory. Whereas with my documentary, head on, I go in and say, look, come on, guys, we've got 2 different versions of the same story. What's the truth here? So, Sam Jones on Flash Gordon had different versions of what he thought the truth was. And we managed to kind of find an appropriate middle ground, so to speak.
Okay. Very good. Were you able to talk to Jerry Lopez or Sandal Bergman?
Sandal Bergman, I did, not Jerry Lopez. So, again, it's simply a case of time and getting hold of people. But, look, the book is sold out officially, so a second print run is coming. So I always get the opportunity to add new photos, add tweaks to interviews. If there's any corrections, which so far Fingers crossed there aren't. But second edition will be coming out, I think, quite soon. So it's always a chance to do something new as well. And frustrating for people who bought the first version. It's like, oh my goodness, what have you done? Put an extra photo and I've got to buy it again. But it's just to try and add some value. If you can add something extra, we did it on Flash, and I think we did it on Doctor Who as well. So.
Oh, that's great. The versions. When you are, so this is just sort of an overall question, I guess, which is, and Ryan kind of alluded to it early on. Obviously, back in the day, there was obviously coverage of the Conan movie. There was a lot written. For you, when you start on these things, and as a fan in general, do you start by kind of gathering what was written, and kind of, is that your starting point, so to speak, in terms of like, let's see what was written, what questions are jumping up, or are you trying to go in fresh and sort of, if you will, forgive me, redo some of that research, from back in the day, or a combo? I'm just curious, how do you start?
If it's a film that I have lots of questions about already, I kind of go in with that bag of questions. I will read all of the other material if it's a witness testimony, but I won't take it as good enough to put in front of the jury, if you will, because a lot of it's conflicting, a lot of it's inaccurate, or hasn't been sourced, and doesn't have kind of separate citations. So I look at everything to get a rounded picture, and I'll go back to people and say, look, you said this in the past, but you also said that as well. They can't both be right. Which is it? So I look at everything, and listen to everything, and watch everything, but then I have to kind of take a stance on it, and often it's one that's not popular. As I mentioned about The Wicker Man, I'm going to be in trouble when fans read that, because I'm going to contradict 50 years of Wicker Man lore around what really happened to the film and the behaviour and so on. Right. So I'm waiting for the backlash on that. I've asked the publisher to send you through copies of that. It's not out until the end of October, but it's another sort of big.
Oh, very cool. Oh, fantastic! Thank you so much.
Sort of whoa, that's another big. Wow.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting, because originally these books, before I started doing them, Tyson did wonderful books on films like The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. But they weren't always challenging in the way that if I was making a documentary and I had everyone gathered and I was able to question and go back and challenge. So I've tried to do that with these books. And I think that's perhaps why people have read them and been a bit more excited, because the information from before, of course, has to be there. But we want to try and give you as much new information and new images as possible, and suggest, what might have happened in terms of legacy and why things have turned out the way they have. Because you have that 40 years perspective as well. People can look back and be different people. Dino and Arnold really clashed to the point of nearly clashing fists. But within a few years, Dino and Arnold had a wonderful relationship. Arnold considered Dino DeLaurentis a second father, and spoke about that publicly. So they had a really close relationship. They were very similar alpha male type characters. So it's kind of satisfying to bring positive information into the books as well. And generally it's positive energy we're bringing as fans to read these books and to rewatch the film after 40 years. So we look at films today that are coming out, and you kind of ponder, in 40 years time, will there be someone like a John Walsh, maybe me in my sad final days, writing a book about that film that's just come out? And it's kind of hard to pinpoint which films those will be, really.
Well, these days it seems very hard to figure out which films those will be, because mainly there are no films. But yeah, there's that too. Yeah.
Yes, and timelessness is a thing that feels like it's being lost by the decade.
This is a semi-generic question, but I am curious about it, which is, in all of your work on the Conan book specifically, what was the most surprising thing you discovered on this book? Like, just, and it can be in any department, anything. Was there anything that you just were kind of like, whoa, or just really either changed how you saw the movie or the production process or whatever? But that question.
The one that first jumps to mind is this one. It's quite niche. It's that Dino wouldn't allow for a stereo mix, even though the film was in theatres in '82 and had quite a large budget. So we go into the details of why he wouldn't agree to a stereo mix. Most theatres were still playing optical stem mono, but many theatres did have a double track stereo after Star Wars in '77. So there's a long time from Star Wars to a Conan in '82. That really surprised me. And the film had a decent budget, and Dino liked to spend, so he wasn't shy of making sure that it was up on screen. So, and Flash Gordon was in stereo. The mix for that was stereo. And that was in 1980, 2 years before. So I think it surprised me. I think it was part of how Dino felt unconfident about the locked print. And so we're not going to go stereo sound. We're going to try and batten down the hatches. We're going to hope that we can overcome this and still do things with Universal
Save
Pictures.
as much money as possible in these final, just like whatever money doesn't need to be spent, just don't. Yeah. Wow.
There is a 5.1 mix that's been created now, but it's from audio sources that are mono.
I think that was to me, the most fascinating thing about it was finding out how little confidence he had. Like, just like the movie for him, I don't know, not his cup of tea. I'm not sure what to call it. It just seemed like, it's not that he hated it. He just didn't, as you put it, kind of didn't get it. Yeah, didn't get it. Yeah. Which is, I don't know, so strange to me, but that was most shocking to me. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was a huge success. I mean, for what it was a huge success. And it
can't have been the violence. He produced Death Wish, for Michael Winner earlier in the 70s, right. And Serpico and so on. And of course, King Kong. The entire industry was deriding the fact that this classic film was being remade. It was a massive success. I've often read contradictory things about Kong 76, saying it was a great flop. It wasn't. When you combine the box office from Christmas 76 with the continuing box office in January, February 77, it's the third biggest film of 76. So, it made its money back in droves. So,
yeah.
I mean, I know my parents took, 6 or 7-year-old me to go see it. I mean, which I don't know. I have very little memory of it. Like, I have a couple of moments of it, but just like, I don't know, that had to have been an event for them to sort of drag the kids to it, as they say. So again, I realize that doesn't necessarily reflect box office, but still, yeah, just kind of wild. Ryan, anything else you wanted to ask before we wrap it up?
No, this has been really fantastic. Thank you, John, for joining us and speaking about the book. I really enjoyed it. It's nice to have this information in one place with a bunch of new photos to go along with it.
It's very nice to just have a Conan book on my shelf. It just makes life easier, as they say.
The movie has deserved it for a long time, so very glad to see it. Where is the best place in terms of putting money in your pocket for people to buy the book? Is it Titan Books direct?
Yeah, it's TysonBooks.com, or you can buy it from your local Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble. Okay. Tyson have a deal with, I think, Macmillan Distributors, so the book's available pretty much everywhere in the world in all bookshops. So pretty much buy it anywhere. And if people who do buy it and want a signed book plate and limited edition bookmark, then all they have to do is email me with their Amazon review. That's what the publisher says I should.
I've got to say here,
Amazon. You've got one.
I've got mine right here. I have to put it in my book, but I've got mine right here.
Mine is in the U.S. So waiting for me the next time I go out there, and I will collect it and bring it back over here.
The back of it peels off. That's fantastic sticker. Yeah.
Can I ask you guys tell them again? How do they? Ask us in a second. But how do they let you know that they've done it? They just they send it to you. They email you, or how do they let you know that they have?
They can find me on social media at Walsh Bros, or on my website walshbros.co.uk, or on my email address info@walshbros.co.uk. And just send me a screenshot. If you Google John Walsh filmmaker,
and all that info's in the show notes. All that info's in the show notes. So yeah.
So the question I had for you chaps was, Ryan,
what did you want to ask us? Yes.
What film book would you most like somebody, if not me, someone to write? Which film is missing its big book?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a great question.
I've got two. I'm just thinking if I'm missing it. I'm going to answer this, and then I'm sure instantly just be like, oh, why didn't I say blank?
Yeah.
I will say though, and I enjoyed Flash Gordon. Again, it's not necessarily one of my movies, but I did very much enjoy your book. I was the double act of a Conan book and finally a Wrath of Khan book was a huge of like cross off my list wherever that fits in. I would love, I don't know, I mean, I feel like it has the cult following, and they are, I think, coming, they just announced, I'm sorry, it just came out, the 4K, so maybe that's enough of a justification. I would be super interested in the Dragon Slayer book, just because I love that movie, and sort of, you know, obviously the dragon itself and that moment in time, and Phil Tippett and all of that, but also, you know, such a great movie. And so that would be one. That would be a biggie. And I love and would be a sucker for an honest to God deep dive into Time Bandits. That's one for me that I love. So that'd be those are two that come to mind that I would be willing at least to pick up and carry around on my back at San Diego Comic-Con for a couple of hours. Yeah, in hardcover. So yeah. That's how I think about what would I be willing to carry around on the floor. So those are two for me.
Okay. And then this can actually be our game, because I think we've played Conan too many times on the show. So I think doing the proper.
What is your favorite prop from Red Sonja?
Yeah, exactly. So my answer would be probably two more obvious, but also kind of surprising that they don't exist. 89 Batman, which shocks me that no one has done. And there's been. People have talked about it. There's been 80 years of Batman, and the cover.
I feel like it gets brought up in other larger books. Batman books, but a soup to nuts, beginning to end Batman book, because all of those people obviously, well, I guess except maybe sadly Anton, what was it?
Anton First.
Yeah. Are around. I mean, now is the time to talk to all of these folks. But yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, actually. and I mean, you could even do a double volume of Returns and and 89. I mean, they could really be two separate books. But
I feel like they should be separate books.
The Tim Burton, Batman universe, and those things would sell like hotcakes. People are still insane about those movies. The other one that I would say is Blade Runner, and I know Future Noir, and I love that book, and the new edition is great, and all the material that Paul Salmon added back in. But what it needs is that's a sit down and read it on the plane sort of book. What it needs is a proper sort of, I don't know, Toshin treatment or Titan Books
I agree
treatment.
With that.
Coffee table book with
a large sort of format, a visual book as well as with the photos, here's the story. Yeah.
All those books are on my long list, but the Warner Brothers won't allow for Batman, Superman the movie, Gremlins, Clash of the Titans as part of the MGM library. We've asked, they said no.
Yeah.
So, which is a shame.
And they have their own book divisions, and they're not even willing to do them. Like, I mean, I understand if they said like, I understand if they sort of was like, we don't want Titan Books in here or whatever. But what I don't understand is, they have a company, publish your own book then. I mean, it's just, again, why no book? Anyway, I realize we're not going to solve that. What are you, I know you mentioned The Wicker Man, which is very close. Have you started on the next one? Are you allowed to say whatever the one that's currently on your desk is? Like the one that doesn't necessarily even have a cover yet? What are you in the middle of?
They won't let me say. So I've been offered.
Can you give a terrible hint?
So I've been offered 3 books, one of which is having a 50th anniversary in 2025. So if you have a look at the films from 1975, that'll give you an idea. And it's kind of a bit like The Wicker Man, but not. No, not Jaws. No, because sadly Jaws has been done.
Okay.
Jaws 3 hasn't been done, or Jaws 2.
Yeah.
But you never know.
Movies 1975.
And this is going to be are you going to do the retinal thing with me that they do in Blade Runner, where if my
right now it's like if he moves, I'm just looking to see if anything jumps really like out at me.
So are you going to take all 3 of these?
75 is a very strange year for movies. That's what I'm really going to tell you. That's what I'm learning.
There's got to be a Bond film in there, right? There's a Roger Moore Bond film in there.
I don't think it's Barry Lyndon, although that would be interesting.
Oh.
I'm trying to think genre. There's a lot of interesting movies, but I'm not sure quite genre. I don't think I'm finding it here. This is not the best way of doing things. So anyway,
are you doing all 3 of those books, or do you have to kind of pick the next one to pursue, John?
I always say yes to everything, so I'll probably end up doing all 3. And I work quite fast as well, because I'm used to doing stuff with cameras and contributors and so on. It's much faster to do a book than it is a documentary in many ways. So in a way, this is like compiling all the information together, but instead of filming, we're popping it into a book, which is great.
Great. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you for all that you do for film nerds like us. Go buy John's book. Buy all of his books.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're not writing. I was just going to say, I know you're not necessarily writing "quote unquote" prop books, but these books, these making of books, I find always really enlighten the prop community in a wonderful way, just in terms of both your reference photos, but also invariably story-wise, something, I don't know what else to say, sheds a light on a prop in a great way. I always appreciate that fact. So I find these sort of making of books sort of essential to my prop library, even though they are not necessarily prop books. So anyway, wherever that fits into to your world.
Reference library essentials.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll get them to put that on as a quote across the cover.
Please do.
Second edition.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.